Honestly, I'd say they're just two kinds really. And I wouldn't really say they're two kinds. I think I would say two tiers really, because the initial tier we have smaller agencies which are primarily sort of equipped to handle social media, website, etc. So they're not really into media buying as such.
More like just purely production agencies.
Absolutely, production agencies plus normally smaller clients who are just sort of moving on to social media. Facebook is pretty big in Pakistan. We have, I believe, about 8 million subscribers from Pakistan on Facebook now, which should make it the largest digital entity, at least in the country. Having said that, so like a lot of smaller companies now want their Facebook pages, they want their Twitter, Twitter handles and all. So normally they're not equipped to handle those internally, or they do not want to sort of hire full-time resources for that. So normally what they end up doing is just outsourcing it for, say, a nominal retainer to one of these smaller agencies, which have a group of people working for them. So they're managing multiple brands. I'd say so most of the smaller brands are working for these because they're not actively advertising in digital. They're just having their presence managed in digital and primarily over social media. And the second tier is perhaps the bigger agencies, that we'd say the agencies that are actually into media buying. So they're actually doing campaigns. They don't just manage media, they actually run campaigns for various clients. Having said that, now if you are especially dealing with younger brands, like I think almost all bigger companies at least have one brand targeted to youth in their portfolio. And if you're sort of targeting that, then you can't really avoid digital. So for example, the company that I'm associated with right now, we have a media team, for example, that supports the marketing team in any case. So there's brand managers who look after the brands and the campaigns. Generally they design those campaigns, etc. And then they brief the media teams to plan the media in a certain way, the media planners essentially. And media teams are actually the ones that are dealing with the media agencies, such as our above the line media buying agency, as well as our digital agency. So in our case, we have a separate specialist person who's specialized in digital, in a way that obviously he was initially a developer, then he was, we got him a bit of training with the Google network, etc. So he's familiar with how to go about things. But then obviously that kind of expertise, because it's not in-house, you sort of outsource it, and that's where the agencies come in. So I guess it's really unique for every company. It's the only thing that's kind of uniform is the fact that one of the bigger brands is now working with digital agencies. So that's there. But again, the digital spend is not big enough right now to sort of deploy those sort of resources. I'd say, probably about 5% of your overall media spending is going towards digital right now for any company. In Pakistan, inevitably you end up focusing on the metros whenever you're planning your marketing, because that's where all the money is sitting at, and that's where all the employment is. So inevitably you're sort of working towards that. And it's really recently actually that I was I saw this online advertisement, so I was sort of helping a friend out with an e-commerce website. So I just wrote to this vendor who I just randomly read about online. I said, I'd like to get in touch with you and I'd like to describe the scope of work and I want a quote, etc., etc. And he said, well, I'm in Germany right now, but when I come back, I'll do that because I'm there for work. I have some clients here. So I said, okay, that's fine. So give me, call me when you're back. So he called me up when he came back and he was like, send me your brief, etc. And I did send him the brief and I said, oh, when can we meet? And he said, well, we can meet over Skype. And I said, why would I do that? You live here, right? Yeah. And he's like, no, I'm in Gujarat. Yeah. I'm based out of Gujarat. And that was very interesting for me because I think sometimes even we as marketers forget that there is world beyond the metro, the bigger cities. Yeah. And that's when you realize, and again, beauty of internet again, because these people are sitting over there, they're directly employed by companies in the West, they're developing for them, and it's really interesting because you keep finding them, and in Lahore especially now, at least I've met at least 2 or 3 people who are sitting over here, they're developing apps for Android, iPhone apps, etc. So it's really interesting because digital, I think, gives you that access. It sort of puts anyone anywhere that they want to be. So I guess in that way, Skype's becoming huge. Like everyone does interviews on Skype and meetings on Skype and everything. And there are people who are developing your websites for as little as 8,000 rupees, which is $80.
Wow. Wow.
And so they're not very high-tech websites, but they do the job, and they're sort of there, and they just so for say a startup or an SME or a smaller company that really doesn't have a digital footprint, it's not very difficult to sort of break that barrier. At least money is not the barrier. One of the largest agencies in Pakistan is now about 7 or 8 years old. So I'd say that advertising has been around for as long as about 8 years, but this 5% that we're now talking about has probably come about in the last 2 years only. So in 2 years, if a medium is taking 5% of your sort of media budget, I'd say it's going to become big.
And who knows where we'll be next year?
No, it's actually really crazy because the way the advertising tariffs for these websites are changing, it is insane. Like the same advertising that you could do for say $10,000 last year is at least twice or 3 times of that this year. So for example, like I was saying, at Coca-Cola, we had a full service digital agency. Now those agencies are equipped to handle all sort of all areas within the digital sort of media, so to speak. So those agencies would say, develop your website, maintain your website, be also responsible for the traffic that's coming to your website. So they're constantly running, say, campaigns or developing content to make sure that there's traffic coming to your website. Then obviously the social media is there. So they're developing social media campaigns again to make sure that you have the right profile of followers or the right number of followers actually. Because like I said, it's fairly new. So usually the agencies start with targets such as get followers and and the second tier obviously is then running campaigns within that. And then of course there's digital advertising. So there are not many agencies, I'd say about 5-6 bigger agencies that are doing a lot of media buying on the digital space also now. So most of the FMCGs, the multinational companies, the bigger operators essentially are all with full service digital agencies, as we'd like to call them. So there are these boutique sort of agencies, and then there are the full service digital agencies.